everybody, What the Flick is What the Fright this month. We're talking about some of the best.
I get it now. It only took me 3 or 4 episodes to get it. So yay, good, very good pun.
Thank you. We are talking about some of the best horror movies of the 21st century so far with a panel of excellent guests. And with us for these couple of episodes is, well, there's one right here,
Is there a green screen that's
right behind you.
Are you going to have Spielberg pop up or something maybe?
Oh, God, wouldn't that be great? Floating head of Steven Spielberg. Let me tell you why Something Evil was the scariest movie I ever made. Have you ever seen Something Evil?
Yeah.
It's not very good.
No. Yeah.
So a made-for-TV horror movie Steven Spielberg did that no one talks about for a reason. I'm getting off track. This is Joe Lynch, the director of Knights of Badassdom, Everly, and Mayhem, and
Wrong Turn 2. Let's talk about Wrong Turn 2.
Let's turn Wrong
we
Turn.
can take Knights of Badassdom out,
Apologies.
put Wrong Turn 2 in.
I like that. I know you had trouble with that. I still think it came out good. I still think your personality's in there. Wrong Turn 2 is a weirdly good sequel in the Wrong Turn series.
It's weirdly good in all the wrong ways. There's the thing.
Fair enough. But we're here to talk about one of the best horror films of the 21st century. Yesterday we talked about Shaun of the Dead.
Yes.
And now we're going to talk about the film that really completely jump-started the zombie boom in which we still live. So why don't you tell us a little bit about 28 Days Later and take us into a clip.
Well, 28 Days Later, the first, would it be the first collaboration between Alex Garland and...
No,
it's
the
the
beach.
second.
They did
the
the
beach.
Beach
is the first. So
it was on the beach that Alex Garland said, hey, fast zombies, and that's where this came from.
And that's where it happened. Well, guess what? This is the first in many collaborations, but you have Danny Boyle, Alex Garland. Is it a zombie movie? Is it not? Let's discuss and watch this clip.
They're infected.
Infected!
Father.
Infected with what?
Oh, I shouldn't have done that.
It's the blood. There's something in the blood.
Okay, so 28 Days Later, there's so many things that this movie did that I think it's almost easy to overlook some of them. So let's think about it right now. One, they rejuvenated the horror of the zombie by making them fast, with something which is still controversial to some horror fans. I've lost track of how many times I've had that debate.
Yep.
It was one of the first prominent movies to be shot on digital cameras, and not even professional high-grade ones.
No, these were DV. This was straight up prosumer, not even prosumer, consumer cameras.
This was like Italian neo-realism, but for horror, because it was just all of a sudden, all the archness is gone. It's just truly, totally intimate.
28 Days Later is the bicycle thief of
Sure.
horror movies.
I'm going
you
with
could,
it.
You could totally say that.
I'm going to say that right now.
Danny
I'm gonna be the guy.
Danny Boyle meets Vincent DeSica, but
because
you
Danny
need
Boyle's
that
an
though.
art house director.
Yeah,
He's made some big movies.
Up until that point, well, when you start out a career when you're doing like Shallow Grave and Train Spotting, it's like he could go anywhere he wanted. And there was one point where he was going to do Alien 4, I guess.
No, it was 4.
It was 4.
It was 4. He was going to do like some weird. It was going to be all wood. Or wait, no, that was the guy who did.
Life Less Ordinary.
Which I think is underrated.
It is underrated, but you didn't know, and then you had The Beach, which just felt like this. I need to make something important, and when you have a director like that, where you can tell he is kind of behind the 8 ball in a way, where there's something hungry about that next project that he wants to do. And when I remember hearing about 28 Days Later and hearing about just the kind of little bit of the backstory behind it, I got to see an advanced screening of the movie at the Fox where no one really knew anything about it, and it was electric because you're right. Zombie movies, like we talked about in the last episode, you can probably stream that now. Zombie movies at that point were kind of on the outs, or they were pushed aside for the J-horror craze at the time. Everybody was worried about creepy little kids in elevators at the time.
Horror goes in cycles. Different things scare us. Different things make money.
It was fine, but no one had that feeling that we did when, like at the time, there was a new edition of Day of the Dead that came out on DVD. And I remember sitting there watching it.
Was it back? Was it all the way back then?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean like the new re-release of Day of the Dead?
Yes.
Oh, I thought you meant the remake. Okay.
No.
Okay, I was about to say that was way later.
There was a new re-release there was one of the many re-releases of Day of the Dead.
It's true.
But I remember watching that movie going like, God, there just aren't many good zombie movies around. And then I saw this screening, and the funny thing was it was a test screening too, and they asked us in the test screening, were they zombies? And I didn't see what the cards were, but I sat there hard pressed to say what they were, because you didn't quite know. It's Boyle and Garland are using the same kind of tropes that you use for zombie movies: the infection, the how you get infected, how you possibly kill them. There are certain things that are kind of connected to the zombie world, yet they're also making their own rules as well. How you get so quickly infected and how you become kind of rage-induced instead of being slow and
But at the same time, we have to remember that I think the word zombie is only used in a George Romero zombie movie like once or twice.
Yep.
And even then,
Which
it's one of
Shaun
the
of the
later
Dead
ones.
even played off of as
Yeah,
well.
don't
where it's
say
like,
the
don't
Z
say
word.
the Z word.
Yeah,
Here,
so-
there's no zombies
Because
whatsoever.
when Night of the Living Dead came out, zombies were still, they were in movies like White Zombie, and they were steeped in the voodoo tradition. That's
Yeah,
where
the
word
Val
comes
Lewton
from.
era?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I Walked with a Zombie, which is
Yeah.
a great
Oh, that's
horror
such
adaptation
a great movie.
of freaking Jane Eyre. Like,
Yeah.
what?
That is a great movie.
It's a great movie. It's one of my favorite opening lines in a movie. Yes, I walked with a zombie.
Good marketing, too.
It works great. Branding. But yeah, no, the idea of zombies have evolved over time. We now think of them as, zombies eat brains. That was invented by Return of the Living Dead. That was way later.
I know. It's funny how people have gotten that mixed up where it's like, brains. And you're like, no, that's not Romero.
Yeah.
That's Russo.
Well, and then
it's
there's
not Romero.
And then there's this weird period after Night of the Living Dead, but before Dawn of the Dead, where people who were ripping off Night of the Living Dead, like the rules hadn't solidified, and you watch something like The Living Dead at the Manchester Morgue, where it's all about like radio waves and like however you died, you come back like that. So if you drowned, you're always soaking wet.
Yep.
It's super weird and creepy because it doesn't fit what we think of as zombies.
Yeah.
So I'm perfectly willing to accept in 20 Days Later that these are zombies. They're zombies in function, if not in name, because they're a big crowd of mindless, face-ripping monsters.
And I don't
That's
remember.
it.
I don't remember. Was anything explained in 28 Weeks Later, which is a solid sequel?
It's
by
pretty
the way.
good. I liked it.
Do they explain that, like, if you are infected, like, are you alive or dead? Like, no one gets that far.
I think they were still researching it. I think that was the idea, but
So
yeah.
really, in the the mythology that those guys kind of established, you could be dead. So the debate of whether or not like you are a zombie or not a zombie, we still had the Romero archetype in our head.
Did you ever see the alternate storyboard ending on the DVD?
Yes. Yep.
Where they had an idea of how you could cure someone from being rage infected, but it just didn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So they abandoned it. So I figured if there's no cure, functionally, that's all there is to it.
And it's fine because really that's not the point, you know. And the thing that I love about 28 Days Later is that you watch the film and like Dawn of the Dead, which is not only my favorite of the Romero movies, it's my first movie. I saw it when I was 2.
No.
I saw it when I was 2.
Dawn of the Dead was
Dawn
your
of the
first.
Dead.
No wonder
was
you turned out like this.
I know, right?
Yeah.
My mom could not find a babysitter, so she took me to go see that movie. Clearly did not see the disclaimer on the poster.
It's called Dawn of the Dead.
And, well, my mom was a big horror movie fan.
Okay,
Hi,
cool.
Mom. How's it going? Sorry I
cool.
mentioned it again. She does not like me telling that story at
My
all.
mom took me to see Staying Alive. That was my first movie in
I
the
just
theater.
realized last night, sorry for going off a tangent
fine.
here, but I saw David Cronenberg's The Fly when I was 8. I saw it in the theaters.
Wow.
My kid is 9. If my kid now saw The Fly, his head would explode.
Well, yeah.
It would be like you go to the scanners meme. It would just like
It's fitting. It's Cronenberg.
well, yeah, it does make sense, but there was something about Dawn of the Dead that always stuck with me, and even back when I remember watching it over and over again, where you forget about the zombies.
Yeah.
You know, there's that huge 45-minute stretch where it's not about the zombies, it's about the people, it's about the the intersection of and the crisscross of all these different conflicting personalities, and it just so happens that there are zombies too that are the catalyst for kind of moving the drama along. And here, you have Cillian Murphy waking up which if you don't see how The Walking Dead kind of ripped that off in the beginning, it's the same scene. It's the same
waking
scene.
up from a coma. And
I love The Walking Dead.
I
but
love it
man,
too, but
like you can't not see
it's
it.
a clever way to start a zombie movie and get right to the heart of the apocalypse
because
and not have to deal with the enormous transition period, because that's a whole story.
From a scripting and story points, like scripting and structure standpoint, like you want to have, instead of there being like this long exposition scene or somebody explaining it or whatever,
or
like,
having to take
to
a
the
whole
audience.
season to explain
Yeah,
it.
you don't need that. Like having someone who is just kind of out of the loop and allowing them to discover it and letting the audience discover it with them. That's what makes. I mean, that first 15 minutes of 28 Days Later, where he is just walking the streets alone, and you can't not see how there were parallels to 9/11 at one point with all the missing people, and how there is that like sense of grounded dread. And it's something that we didn't see a lot in movies at that point.
And the aesthetic of the film really sells that, because if you had done that with a big glossy World War Z, type of budget, it would not have the same impact as if we're shooting on a mini DV camera you can get around the corner at a Radio Shack back when we had those.
Yeah.
Like it has a very different vibe to it. You know,
There's an immediacy to it.
enormous immediacy, and yet we talk about all the different ways that 28 Days Later sort of brought the zombie genre forward. I think about all the ways in which it is very much beholden to what came before. When you look at 28 Days Later and you watch it again, the whole story takes you from Night of the Living Dead in the first act, Dawn of the Dead in the second act, where everyone's sort of shopping, getting appreciating the element of it,
with this.
and the last act is Day of the Dead, pretty much on the nose.
Yeah.
When they finally get to, with the military coming in and that sort of the different perspectives of how to treat the end of the world and how idealism and cynicism and the evils of practicality.
Holy shit, dude, you totally nailed it. Like, it's all 3 movies in one.
It is.
It really is.
And
like,
yet it feels new.
Brendan Gleeson's section is totally Dawn of the Dead because you do forget about the zombies for a time. The fact that there's
they're
that
just
moment
shopping,
where
they're
they're
look,
smiling.
these apples are
it's
still
that
good.
moment
Yeah.
in Dawn where they're like, "Let's go shopping." You know, it's like it's all there, and again, there's a good amount of time where you forget about the zombies and it's about the people. And then that goddamn crow had to drop that freaking like seriously, why that crow? The movie could have been so much different.
I'm so glad though, because it always infuriates me when I see a zombie movie or any sort of movie about an infection or potential infection in which someone kills a zombie with an axe, they've got blood splattered all over them, and they don't immediately run to disinfect themselves.
Oh my
They're just walking
God.
around. I'm like, how are you? I'm OCD enough as it is. If there
I
were
know.
zombies, I would be like out of my mind.
I have normal people bleed on me, and I'm just like, "Bah, get away!"
How
Like,
often
like
does that happen to you?
we'll talk after the
Listen
cameras
to
are
the
off.
movie crypt, I guess.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
happens every week.
But I think what makes that opening so effective is that you're right. Like you get all of the things that we love about zombie movies without anyone ever saying zombies. Like there's that moment where he's just kind of walking the streets going, "Hello!" How can you not think of Day of the Dead in that opening without, it's hitting all the marks that we love about zombie movies without ever actually saying that it's a zombie movie. And I mean, look, the fact that people would even have that debate only makes the movie more effective because people go, I got to see this, or we have to discuss this more, instead of it being like, no, it's clearly zombies or it's not. And just like what we were talking about with Shaun of the Dead, it is about the characters. It just so happens that these characters are surrounded by this unbelievable threat that is going to, whether it's going to kill them or not, like they have to deal with it.
You know, there's this breed of film fan or film critic or anyone really who I don't think takes the horror genre seriously until they're sort of given an excuse to. And that it came from the pedigree of Danny Boyle,
Yeah.
that it came from Alex Garland, who's a respected novelist,
Yeah.
that it sort of abandoned some of the more flamboyant tropes of the genre.
The Trump tropes.
All of a sudden, this felt like, oh, well, we can really enjoy this zombie movie. And it's easy to be cynical about that as a horror fan who's loved the
Yeah.
genre for forever, but we do have to appreciate that there are moments when films just simply break out and people of all types, people who wouldn't normally watch a horror movie, can fully appreciate just how expansive it is. And a movie like 20 Days Later should be respected for that. I think some people resent it for that. I think it should be respected for
You're right. Like when that movie came out, like Danny Boyle was still like this other director, and coming off the beach, like here's a movie that people were thinking like, oh, this is going to be Leo's big movie. This is going to be Danny Boyle's big movie at the time, and it didn't quite hit. No. And then when you have this movie come out from Fox Searchlight, which is usually like Oscar bait central, there was a respectability already to the movie. And you're right. Like it made people who normally don't like horror movies take a look at it. And if you look at that movie again, it could be construed as not really a horror film. It's more of like it's almost like a Paul Greengrass movie at points.
But it's a horror movie.
Oh, we know it's a horror movie.
We've been having this conversation a lot. The idea that, oh, well, that's not a horror movie. That's a coming-of-age movie with a demon
Well, there
clown.
was always that thing when you read Fangoria, and they would be like, "It's not really a horror movie." There would be that little.
It's
section
not really a remake. It's a reboot.
It's a psychological thriller.
It's a reimagining. No, let's just call it what it is. It's a movie in which a whole bunch of people get infected by a virus that makes them kill everybody else. I don't.
Sounds very familiar.
That
Kind of like a
sounds-
movie coming out November 10th.
What the fuck? But at
maybe.
the same time, I feel like we have to look at not necessarily whether or not it scares you, but whether or not it's the function of the thing.
Yeah.
What's it trying to be? Like a comedy is still a comedy if it doesn't make you laugh. It's just not a very good comedy, perhaps.
Yeah.
So even if it doesn't, this isn't like your scare. if zombies aren't the thing that terrify you. I think this is definitely a horror movie. I think Shaun of the Dead is definitely a horror movie,
absolutely.
for example. So, I think this is one of the great horror movies.
I got to bring this one up. Is this one of the few movies at all that have ever used like the 1 week later or like a diegetic title card as the title of the movie twice? Because you have it like twice in the movie. It has the 28 days later.
Right.
There's never you never actually get a title card for the movie. You're always getting it. It's been weaved into the narrative structure. I've never seen that before. Like watching it again yesterday, I'm like, I can't remember another movie that used like imagine if The Shining was called Thursday. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't
That's
think I've
interesting.
ever seen a movie that actually uses the trope of a title card that's used diegetically to kind of tell the story and keep things moving along, but it's actually the title of the movie.
I don't know if I've seen that either. Someone's gonna leave a comment
sure.
or tweet us.
Please
tweet
tell
us.
us,
Like
you
if
know.
that's a different thing, that'd be really fun to find out because you're right. That's very unusual.
There hasn't been a 1 year later, you know. I mean,
Not that I
maybe
know
one
of.
of those Gary Marshall movies where it says like Mother's Day. You know, it's like it's a date, I guess, but the immediacy that instills into the audience because you're watching and you're going, is that the title or am I just part of the storyline? And you kind of dropping the Trump thing. It's like you could put, ever since that goddamn election, you could put 28 days later on anything, any video press release that Trump puts out, and you go like, uh-oh.
Like any tweet, then 28 days later.
And then 28 days later, but that's
yeah.
what makes the movie work is that it is so grounded that you can't not, like you look at Shaun of the Dead and there is a slightly elevated or heightened reality. Slightly, you know, not much, but it's mostly the characters, it's the way that Edgar shoots his movies.
The dialogue is a little too crisp. People don't usually
it's
that
a
witty.
little arch,
Yeah.
but that's part of the narrative that he's weaving and the tapestry that he's creating. With 28 Days Later, that shit could happen. Like watching it again,
feels realistic,
especially when
yeah.
you have that opening. And one last thing I wanted to talk about was, you know, you have that opening where it's like all the chaos and all the mayhem. Nice plug, but all the news footage of everyone just beating the crap out of each other and chaos and riots and everything, and then it pulls out to the scene with the monkey. And I wish I would have listened to the commentary again, but I can't quite remember that scene where they let the monkey out, and then obviously all hell breaks loose at that point. Feels like it's a movie.
Yeah.
And then once we get into the Cillian Murphy stuff, it now feels like it's almost documentary, you know? And I thought that was a very smart choice by the filmmakers to make you feel like, okay, we got this part out of the way, we've set the stage, and now you're in it with him.
Here's what would really happen.
Exactly.
We got to wrap this up.
Yes.
So our
we
ratings.
could talk for days.
our
We could talk
ratings.
for 28 days about this one.
What's your rating for 28 Days Later? On
A
What the Place
solid 9.5.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's about right. I think there's parts of it that just feel like they're a little beholden to what came before. I do think it makes it fresh, though. I'm going to give this one a 9.6. The tables have turned.
I've been trumped.
Shut up. All right, so everybody, thank you so much for watching What the Fright. We will be back with more great stuff soon. Joe Lynch's new film, Mayhem, in theaters November 10th, also on VOD if you can't find it near you. And listen to him every week on the Movie Crypt podcast.
Bye.